Welcome to this segment of Authentication Services 4.0, and we're going to cover the topic of group policy. Now, with Authentication Services 4.0, we've discussed previously that you can join UNIX systems to Active Directory, and you get several benefits from this. And the one that we're going to talk about here is now the ability that we can take Active Directory's group policy framework and extend that to our UNIX systems. Now, in the Control Center here, one of the new features we have in Authentication Services 4.0, I'm going to go to the Group Policy section, and you'll see that right now I'm displaying all of the GPOs or group policy objects that I have in Active Directory, and I have several hundred of them listed here. I've been in organizations where they actually have thousands of various GPOs set up. And one thing that we can quickly do is we can filter on these GPOs that are in our environment and find only the ones that actually have UNIX settings in them. So let me go ahead and select this one. Now the name of my GPO is just called UNIX 2FA Login, and I'm going to edit this GPO. So I'll go ahead and click on that, and it's going to launch the Group Policy Object Editor. And you'll notice, if you're familiar with group policy, this will have a very familiar look and feel to you. We do support both computer and user-based policies. And then what we do with our snap-in extensions is we provide some new nodes for managing settings for Unix and Mac specifically. Now if we take a look at the Mac briefly, you'll see that we have a number of different settings specifically for the Mac. And these would be things typically that you would find in the Workgroup Manager. So things like managing the dock. For example, we can come in and manage the where the dock displays on the user's desktop, and if it's small or large, on the left-hand side, or etc. So in addition to Mac settings, we also support a number of Unix-specific settings. And in this particular section, we're going to look at a couple of examples here. And let me set up this to have details view. Now, the way group policy works in Active Directory is pretty straightforward. There's a number of policy settings that are configured, and then periodically the systems that are joined to Active Directory that are within scope of that group policy object will apply those settings. And what we do, obviously, is we have to, on the Unix side, interpret the settings that are in group policy and make the specific changes on our Unix system to match the policy. Now, here's a couple common policies that we have that people take advantage of. One is our message of the day policy, a very straightforward policy. We can set up so that all Unix systems have the same message of the day. But what I want to show in here is that we can actually, from the GPOE, we can import settings from remote Unix systems. So in this case, I'm going to browse out to a remote Linux system, and I'm going to go ahead and log in with a user. And I'm going to browse for the message of the day that I want to use, and I happen to have that stored in a file in my temp file system. So here's a file called motd.txt. I'm going to go ahead and import that into my GPOE, and you'll see it says thank you for using Quest Authentication Services, and let me apply that and say OK. So that was just a quick example of how we can make it easy to actually get the settings into Active Directory group policy. Now let me show a more advanced policy. We have a policy for managing OpenSSH and the various settings in OpenSSH. Now the SSHD config file is a fairly complex file, but again, we've tried to make it simple to manage these settings within the GPOE framework. Now, let me go ahead and search on a keyword like root, and it'll find all the various attributes or keywords in the SSH policy that have the word root in them. So we have a setting here called permit root login, and we actually show the specific information about that setting here, and then we have the various defaults and drop-downs available. So permit root login is typically on by default, and a lot of people will go ahead and say no to that and turn that off. And all that means is the root user cannot SSH directly to his system. You'd actually have to SSH to the system as a non-root account, and then elevate your account with SU or sudo, etc., to get access to the elevated root account. Another example that I'll show briefly here is about access control. This is another very popular group policy. So with the Active Directory group policy framework, we can actually control which Active Directory users allow to authenticate to which Unix systems. And in this particular case, I'm going to use a very basic setup here, or a very basic example. I'm going to add a group in Active Directory. I have a group called Unix admins, and I'm going to add that to my access control policy. So every Unix system that is within the scope of this GPO, when this policy applies, only members of the Active Directory group Unix admins will be allowed to log in to that particular system. And I won't show it here, but I'll mention that one of the more popular features or components of group policy is the fact that we can support text replacement macros. And this is what allows us to have one GPO to cover lots of systems that need individual specific system settings in the GPO. So we can set up a macro. A common example would be people want to have individual groups to control access to individual systems, but they don't want to create a single GPO for every Unix system. So what they'll do is in Active Directory, they'll create a group called maybe like, hostname-ACG, and then they'll create one GPO, and the macro will be a hostname-ACG. And then on each individual Unix system, that hostname will actually be filled out for the actual hostname of the system itself. So one GPO, but multiple system-specific settings. Now I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now if we've set up a couple different settings, if I come back to our particular view in the Control Center and refresh it, I want to show that if I now select that UNIX 2FA login GPO, I can get a settings report as well right from here. So this is important because we can see the specific settings that we've now set up within our GPO. And you can see there's the message of the day policy that I set up, and I now have an access control policy for Unix admins. And then I had a number of MAC settings in there that I didn't change, but they were in there previously to my policy. So now we can provide reports for the individual settings. So the last component is actually showing how the policies get applied on Unix. To do that, I'm going to SSH out to that system, to a system that's in scope with this GPO. Let me log in. I'm going to elevate to root because I want to show a couple commands here. Now this is very analogous on the Windows side. If you wanted to force a policy update, you could run a command similar to gpupdate/force. On the Unix side, we have a utility called vgptool, and it has an apply flag. So I'm going to go ahead and force an apply. Now, if you're curious, the default is that every 90 minutes policy will update. That 90 minutes is tunable, so you can tune that up or down as much as you want. But for the demo here, instead of waiting 90 minutes, I'm going to force a policy update. And then I'm going to run a command for the resultant set of policies, RSOP. And I like to show that because this demonstrates exactly what settings were just set on this particular system. So here's the GPO that was called UNIX 2FA login that was in scope for this system. And then what we had in there is settings for the message of the day. And then we also set up an access control for only members of the Active Directory group called UNIX admins are allowed now to log into this particular system. So there's a lot more to our group policy, but I wanted to give you an overview, and then I want to invite you, if you're curious, we have additional white papers available that explain some of the additional capabilities of our group policy functionality. In addition, we provide an evaluation of Authentication Services 4.0, and you're more than welcome to download Authentication Services 4.0 and take a look at it yourself and get some hands-on.